Aloha, everyone, and happy Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. My name is Crystal Ka'ai, and as the Executive Director of both the White House Initiative and the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, I want to welcome you to today's special webinar that we are hosting in conjunction with the White House Office of Management and Budget to uplift and celebrate historic revisions to the federal government's Statistical Policy Directive 15, or SPD 15, that will change how the government collects race and ethnicity data. For nearly 3 decades, many AA and NHPI leaders have advocated for the SPD 15 race and ethnicity standards to be updated in order to better collect, analyze, and disseminate disaggregated data on our nation's diverse population, including our AA and NHPI communities. Throughout this briefing, you will hear from senior White House officials, as well as AA and NHPI community leaders, who will discuss what the updated SPD 15 revisions mean for our communities and why they are so critical. Together, we look forward to working with everyone tuning in today to prioritize the importance of data disaggregation as we work to advance equity, justice, and opportunity for our communities. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague and dear friend, Erica Moritsugu, who serves as Deputy Assistant to the President and our nation's first ever AA and NHPI Senior Liaison based in the White House Chief of Staff's office. Erica, the floor is yours.
Mahalo, Crystal, and thank you for your breathtaking leadership, inclusive of this breathless month and all year round. Aloha, y'all. Happy Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I'm proud to join you all from the ancestral homelands of the Anacostan and Piscataway people here in a place we now refer to as Washington, D.C. And last year, we were proud to produce the largest Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month celebration ever hosted by any presidential administration. As President Joe Biden had said in his recent proclamation on AA and NHPI Heritage Month, quote, "Our nation celebrates the diversity of cultures, breadth of achievements, and remarkable contributions of these communities, of brave immigrants who, motivated by the promise of possibilities, picked up their lives and found new homes here, and of Native peoples who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial, and of community leaders, shaping a brighter future for us all." Now, many of the wins for our community were made possible by ideas and contributions from the community directly. The chief, paramount, bestest example may be the subject of this webinar today. Thanks to the decades of advocacy, the White House recently announced major changes to the standards that shape how we collect and report on federal data on race and ethnicity. The changes our administration announced in March, the first revisions in nearly 30 years, are groundbreaking. They will help to improve data collection and disaggregation across every federal agency. And the Office of Management and Budget's decision on SPD 15 validates the importance of data disaggregation to so many communities, because these new standards will help make once invisible communities visible. And they'll ensure that our government will better serve our diverse AA and NHPI populations and the American people. While we celebrate the historic leap forward on data disaggregation, we also acknowledge the work ahead to collaborate with our communities and federal agencies to implement the new standards. And that is our promise and pledge to you today. With that, I am now pleased to introduce Kota Mizutani, Senior Advisor to the Office of Public Engagement at the White House. Kota previously served in several positions on Capitol Hill, including the AIPAC's Congressional Fellow for Representative Mark Takano of California and Staff Assistant for Representative Don Beyer from Virginia. Most recently, he served as the Deputy Communications Director for the House Committee on Education and the Workforce under Ranking Member Bobby Scott of Virginia. Kota was born and raised in Northern California and is a graduate of Brown University. Ladies and gentlemen and gentlefolk, Kota Mizutani. Kota, over to you, my friends.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Kota Mizutani, and I serve as a Senior Advisor for Public Engagement at the White House. Erica, thank you so much for that introduction. So pleased to join my White House colleagues, OMB, and leaders and allies of our AA and NHPI communities for today's webinar. As Erica mentioned, this month, AA and NHPI Heritage Month is special for all of us. Here at the White House, we've held celebratory events, substantive briefings, and much more to uplift our stories, our cultures, the progress we've achieved together for the betterment of AA and NHPIs. And I know each one of us has put in long hours over the last few weeks, so just want to thank and recognize everyone's hard work and leadership there. Our progress to expand the collection and use of disaggregated data on AA and NHPI communities stands as one of the most exciting achievements that we can celebrate this month. This issue has been a priority for generations of our community's advocates, and since day one, this administration has been committed to making that a reality. So this March, the White House Office of Management and Budget revised its standards for the collection of federal data on race and ethnicity for the first time in nearly 30 years, as Erica mentioned. And this update will help ensure that AA and NHPI individuals can more fully self-identify by specific ethnicity. But this is about more than just better data collection. It is a true game changer for our communities. Having disaggregated data means that we can better identify where the gaps exist in participation in our federal programs, and therefore where we need to focus our resources, whether it's support for AA and NHPIs for home ownership, access to quality healthcare, start businesses, the list goes on. But as it's been recognized already, this historic step would not have been made or would not have been possible without the hard work and collaboration between our federal agencies, our community partners, so many people who are joining us today. But I also know that each person here has a unique appreciation for the work ahead, the continued need for that collaboration at the federal, state, and local levels to implement those new standards. So we look forward to your continued partnership in helping to expand opportunity access and inclusion for all Americans. And with that, I am now pleased to welcome Nani Coloretti, Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Deputy Director Coloretti and her team are continuing to play an instrumental role in ensuring that the data we collect better represents the diversity of the American people, including AA and NHPIs, and advances our administration-wide commitment to equity in all the work that our federal agencies do each and every day. Deputy Director Coloretti, over to you.
Aloha. Thank you so much, Kota, Erica, Crystal. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nani Coloretti, and as mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and you'll be hearing from some of my colleagues today as well, and I'm glad that they're here. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today during this very special month. And as President Biden noted in his proclamation, we celebrate Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities whose integrity, grit, and perseverance have pushed our great American experiment forward. So while I come to you today as the Deputy Director of OMB, I also come to you as the highest ranking Filipino American in the Biden administration, as someone who also grew up in Hawaii and served local government in many years in San Francisco, California. So just want to make sure everyone knows Happy Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So today I want to talk a little bit about our recent updates to Statistical Policy Directive 15 on race and ethnicity data, which prioritizes data disaggregation. We're actively working at OMB and across the federal government to ensure that federal statistics accurately and relevantly capture the diversity of the American people, including the diversity of the AA and NHPI communities. I'll start just by saying a few words about the White House Office of Management and Budget, where I work. We serve the President of the United States in implementing his vision across the executive branch, and we're the largest component in the executive offices of the President. President Biden has called OMB the nerve center of government, and for good reason. There's somebody at OMB who knows key information about every agency and every program in the federal government. We work across the federal government to help the president make the best informed decisions. And our work spans federal regulation, agency management, such as procurement, technology, and human resource policy, in addition to the federal budget. And in fact, Erica Morisugu, who you heard from earlier, has called OMB the nerd center of government, and that's a nickname that we proudly own. OMB is uniquely suited to build equity into the general business of government and to make sure that government works better for all of us. And we're pushing on every open door, regulatory, budgetary, and legislative, to continue to increase opportunity and equity across government. So our recent revisions to SPD 15 are one way that we're pushing. We can't serve communities unless we can see them. And aggregated data of the AA and NHPI communities often obscures significant disparities within groups. And I use this example a lot. Total cancer rates for the AA and NHPI populations are on average lower than the white population in the United States. However, disaggregated data shows that the rate of liver cancer for Laotian women is more than 9 times higher than for white women. But it's only by disaggregating data that we can uncover this information and work on solving these disparities. This March, as you've heard, OMB published a set of updates to SPD 15. And this was the first update to these standards since 1997, nearly 30 years. And one of the reasons why OMB's Office of the U.S. Chief Statistician, who you'll hear from later today, took this on is because we really saw an increasing need for detailed race and ethnicity data to better understand within-group inequities and to work on those outcomes, to better those outcomes. So it took the combined effort of staff across dozens of federal agencies, input from thousands of members of the public. The working group charged with updating this information received over 20,000 public comments to its initial proposals. It hosted 94 listening sessions, 3 public virtual town halls, and a tribal consultation. And I particularly want to thank the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders for advocating for data disaggregation with community for a very long time and over many years. And we are continuing to hear from advocates from the AA and NHPI community to provide input on how we're implementing these revised standards. I also want to thank the Middle Eastern and North African communities who have long advocated for a MENA minimum category, distinct from other categories, which we have added, and for advocating for this data disaggregation requirement as well. So the updated standards require the collection of additional data beyond the minimum required race and ethnicity categories. This is now required for all minimum categories, including the Asian category and the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander categories. This will ensure that federal data collections measure and reflect the diverse experiences of the American people, including the AA and NHPI community. The updated standards also require race and ethnicity information to be collected using one combined question, allowing people to select as many options as apply to fully reflect how they identify. It adds, as I mentioned before, the Middle Eastern and North African category as a new minimum category, and it removes outdated terminology. So looking forward, the update instructs agencies in the federal government to begin updating their data collection as soon as possible. By September of next year, all Chief Financial Officer or CFO Act agencies and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission will need to submit an agency action plan describing how that agency intends to comply with the updated standards. And all federal data collections and programs are required to be in compliance with this new standard within 5 years, no later than March 2029. And OMB's Office of the U.S. Chief Statistician has also convened an interagency committee to focus on the race and ethnicity data standards and to undertake regular reviews of the implementation of SPD 15 going forward, and also to maintain a government-wide research agenda. So as both OMB and within the broader Biden administration, we're committed to doing work that advances equity for all, including communities that have long been underserved. And so these revisions are just one example of this commitment, and we're committed to seeing it through. I encourage everybody to visit and bookmark spd15revision.gov on the web, which is our storefront into all of this incredible work, and where you can find the revised SPD 15 Working Group's final recommendations report, additional tools, and just more information. So thanks for coming to this webinar. It has been really inspiring to see the work on this in community and our partnership with the federal government, including advocacy on behalf of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. I think this kind of work helps hold us accountable as the federal government, and it makes our work better. So thanks for your time, and thanks for being here today. I'm now going to pass it over to one of my colleagues, Sam Berger. He is the Associate Administrator at the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OMB. He actually came to us from another part of the Biden administration where he joined to work on as the Director of Strategic Operations and Policy for the COVID-19 response team. If you can remember that all the way far back to the beginning of the Biden administration, but he's also served at the Center for American Progress, and he also served the Biden administration in the White House Office of the Domestic Policy Council. So welcome, Sam, and handing the mic over to you.
Thanks so much, Nani. And thanks so much, everyone. Really happy to be here. As Nani mentioned, I'm the Associate Administrator here at OHIAA. I want to talk to you a little bit more about SPD 15. So I think we all know the update to SPD 15 is going to improve the quality and usefulness of the race and ethnicity data that agencies across the federal government collect, publish, and use to evaluate equitable program delivery and outcomes, monitor and enforce civil rights laws, and describe the demographic makeup of our country. And as Nani just said, we're committed to seeing this through. So what does seeing this through mean? What's it meant over the last couple of months? And what will it look like going forward? So here at OHIAAA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, we're the federal government's central authority for the review of regulations, the approval of government information collections, establishment of governmental statistical practices, and coordination of federal privacy policy. We oversee the implementation of government-wide policies in various areas, and this includes statistical policy. OHIAAA has tools to effectively implement the updated race and ethnicity data standards, and we're already starting to use those tools to quickly move agencies to come into compliance with these standards. The updated standards came into effect the day they were published, March 28th. We immediately began working with federal agencies and programs on implementation, and we already have information collections that have adopted the revised race and ethnicity question that will start using the updated forms and surveys shortly. So, for example, the CDC's and FDA's National Youth Tobacco Surveys for 2024 through 2026 are now compliant with the updated standards. So are the National Institute of Standard Technologies, NIST's measurement of risk preferences and perception for experts in community resilience planning fields. It's important to recognize that it's going to be easier for some programs to make the change than for others. A lot of important data gets collected by non-federal entities like schools, jails, or hospitals that's then reported up to federal agencies. And so dealing with those situations will take more planning and coordination. We're going to get there, but it will take a little bit longer. The updated SPD 15 requires every CFO Act agency and the EEOC to submit an action plan to OMB describing how they will implement the new standards. These action plans are intended to help us identify and strategize how to provide support to the programs that are going to need it, with the goal of meeting the SPD 15's requirement for every single data collection across government to be following these updated standards within 5 years. And just to be clear, we anticipate that most collections will be updated sooner than that. It's really the more challenging ones that we want to make sure we have a plan and that we're able to get there within the 5 years. Nani mentioned, and you all know, that robust public engagement that we received as we were reviewing and updating the standards. We had over 20,000 public comments, nearly 100 listening sessions, 3 packed virtual town halls, and a tribal consultation. We knew that a lot of people and communities across the nation, along with you on today's webinar, were invested in OMB's review and update of SPD 15, and we know that these same people and communities, and all of you, continue to be invested in the work and the success of the implementation of these revised standards. We take this public engagement and transparency responsibilities very seriously, and we're going to continue to do so. With that, I will now turn it over to Karen at OHIAAA, who is the Chief Statistician of the United States of America. Karen.
Great, thank you, Sam. As noted, I'm Karen Orvis, Chief Statistician of the United States, and I am just thrilled to be able to be a part of today's event and to see so many folks have joined. We have over 200 from the last time I looked at the count. And also getting to hear from the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities and your representatives. This really is an exciting time, and I'm looking forward to telling you a little bit about the things my office has been doing to contribute to the efforts to implement the updated Statistical Policy Directive on Race and Ethnicity data standards. But before I do, I wanted to take a step back and just pause for a moment and recognize the importance of where we are now. And we heard that from others, but I want to reiterate it from my point of view as well. As Nani mentioned, these standards haven't been updated in over 27 years. And the demographics of the United States have changed over time. And we know these absolutely critical data were not keeping up with those changes. And that's why I identified this update as being a critical priority for me, one of my top priorities when I first became the Chief Statistician of the United States approximately 2 years ago. And thanks to the hard work of over 100 staff members across dozens of agencies, input from thousands of members of the public, which you've heard about already, these standards really are going to help us create more useful, accurate, and up-to-date federal data on race and ethnicity. They're going to help our ability to be able to compare information and data across agencies and to really understand how well our federal programs are serving our diverse America. I also want to take the opportunity while I'm sharing this stage with many OMB colleagues and EOP colleagues to really thank them for their support to ensure that this process and our review and our update of SPD 15 was transparent, based on research and testing, and it included critical input from the public. These updated standards are based in strong evidence. And because of that, I'm confident that we're going to be able to see as a result more accurate and useful race and ethnicity data. Okay, so we have the updated standards in place now. Now we're working hard and really with purpose to help agencies adopt these as soon as possible. In addition to the things you've already heard today, my office is continuing to play an important role in supporting implementation. In the Federal Register notice that announced the updated standards, you saw that OMB committed to establishing a standing interagency committee that focuses on these standards. I'm really excited to announce that this committee, which we're calling the Federal Committee on SPD 15, they held their kickoff meeting just last week. This committee is going to develop, maintain, and carry out a government-wide research agenda. They're going to undertake regular reviews of these standards. But then more time sensitive, they're also going to be focusing more immediately on implementing the updated standards across the federal government, really to ensure that all agencies and all information collections are in compliance as soon as possible and no later than March 2029. So for example, the committee is tackling government-wide data processing procedures, like how do you code write-in responses? Also looking at bridging programs, user guides, test data sets to improve upon the excellent work that's already taken place. The committee is also going to focus on agencies' action plans for implementation along with other imperative work. Now, I mentioned bridging programs just a minute ago. What do I mean by that? It means figuring out how to crosswalk data that was collected under the 1997 standards with data that's being collected under the 2024 standards. This is really critical because federal programs not only want to, but they need to maintain longitudinal trends. And also, many of our data sets include data that were collected at different points in time. So for example, if you consider HR databases, where employees' demographic information may be collected at one point in time, how do we go about doing that? I'm also thrilled to share that, in case you didn't know, that the previous Interagency Technical Working Group on Race and Ethnicity Standards, that was the group that recommended these updates for SPD 15. They developed an initial set of bridging programs that are available to all federal agencies and the public. And these programs were immediately available soon after the release of the updated standards. And you can find them on spd15revision.gov, that storefront that Nani mentioned. And now the new federal committee is going to maintain these bridging programs and also continue to update and refine them as new data is collected and we learn more lessons. This is really just one example of work that needs to happen to help alleviate major challenges in terms of implementing the updated standards. I want to close by saying that I think we all know implementing these updated standards is going to be a great deal of work for federal agencies and programs and really beyond. But I will say across this entire process, so from June 2022 to today, I have witnessed and experienced such an incredible amount of consensus and energy across the government on how important this work is. And across the government and beyond, I truly believe that people know we need to get this done, we need to get it done right, and we need to get it done on time. And certainly we're really looking forward to your efforts as well to help us achieve this. And so with that, I'll pass back over to Crystal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Orvis, and I want to thank all of our White House speakers, including our OMB colleagues, for your presentation. We're going to bring our OMB speakers back at the end of the webinar to answer any questions you all may have. And as a reminder to our audience, and some of you are already doing this, but please use the Q&A function on your screen to share any questions that you have with us, and we'll make sure that we get to those at the end of the presentation as time allows. But next, we're going to move into a very special panel, our community panel. And I'd like to introduce some dear friends and colleagues who are AA and NHPI community leaders to share their perspectives on the opportunities that we have in light of the SBD 15 revisions. So I'd like to have our panelists turn on their cameras and welcome them to the screen. We have Greg Orton, who is the National Director of NCAPA, which stands for the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans. Quinn Din, who is the Executive Director of CRAC, the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center. Sina Weepy, who's a policy associate for EPIC, which is Empowering Pacific Islander Communities. Terry Alminis, our Vice President for Census and Voting at the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. And Akhil Vora, who's the Director of Policy with API Data. So we're so pleased to have all of you here with us today. All of your organizations have done tremendous work engaging with the administration on this really critical priority. So I know we don't have a ton of time left and we do want to leave time for Q&A, but I want to pose a question to all of our panelists and we'll go down the line and having you answer. But I want you to explain to our audience members why it's critical to disaggregate data for AA and NHPI communities, and what are some of the examples of challenges that we see when data is aggregated and how that has created barriers for your respective organizations or the groups that you advocate for. So I'm going to toss first to Greg to share again what is, what's so critical about this new SBD 15 and why it's important to the communities that you advocate for. So Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Crystal, and thank you so much to the Biden administration for all of this tremendous work that has brought us to today. And yes, it is a question of why all of this is so important. Before I get to that, NCAPA, the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, is the umbrella coalition of 41 of the largest Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander civil rights organizations in the country. And every time I talk about SBD 15 and the impact that it's going to have, I kind of laugh, right? Because let's be real. When you talk about data and standards and revisions, a lot of folks' eyes are going to glaze over, and it's not the sexiest topic. But if we're going to be honest about it, when you really get to the core of it, this is a tremendously impactful opportunity for our community to finally be seen by the federal government. Good data is, a requirement for good policy. And for the policy nerds, good data and federal policy making, data is that ticket to the big dance. And for so long, as we heard from previous speakers, our community has been dancing with shoes that don't fit. And so I'm genuinely excited about the opportunity to correct for that and give us a real opportunity to get down on this. I would also say when it comes to SBD 15, we'll hear from my colleagues as far as the direct impact that is already being felt in communities. But I do want to say, when you think about NCAPA, I always struggle with the analogy to use. I've lately, because of the NBA playoffs, I've been using a sports analogy. NCAPA is the team, right? But the folks that you're going to hear from, they're our players. They're our all-stars, our three-point specialists, the folks who have lockdown defense, and the ones who are truly getting this work done. And so, yes, it has been a lot of work. It's been a long time, but we're here. And I would just remind everybody on this webinar that we should take a moment to appreciate the fact that all of the hard work, the painstaking hours, the resiliency that everyone has demonstrated has brought us here. And it certainly would have been possible without all of the folks we heard from earlier in the Biden administration. So again, thank you so much to them. Thank you to our members of the coalition who helped drive this work forward. There's certainly more to do, but today is absolutely a good day. So let me get out of the way so we can hear from other community leaders who, again, can speak to the importance of this development.
Thanks so much, Greg. And next I'm going to turn over to Quinn Din with CRAC. And Quinn, I know in particular for the Southeast Asian community, data disaggregation is so critical. So would love to toss to you for your perspectives on this really important work.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Crystal. Again, big thank you to the White House Initiative on AA and NHPIs and also OMB OMB for your leadership in this historical update. As many of you know, for CREC in our communities, as Greg said, this is about fighting for our community's right to be seen. And the only way to do that is really through disaggregated data that reveals rather than conceals systemic generational inequities that are masked when our communities are lumped together under the Asian category. For CREC, this is particularly important for Southeast Asian communities from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, the largest community of refugees ever resettled in America, who are survivors of war, survivors of genocide, survivors of multi-generational poverty, who still experience deep inequity because of this experience. This is why the new standards are so important for us, because with the requirement for agencies to disaggregate further detailed communities, including the 6 most populous, the Vietnamese community will now have data that never existed nationwide. This is a huge victory for our community visibility. And we're also urging agencies to keep in mind 2 gaps with the new policy that we're actively monitoring. First is that we urge agencies to go beyond the minimum requirement. We know that this sounds like a big ask, but we absolutely are recommending that there is a writing category that goes beyond the 6 most populous communities, because we know that inequity isn't correlated with population size. For example, when it comes to higher education, while 50% of Asian Americans have a bachelor's degree or higher, this is only true for 28% of Vietnamese, 17% of Cambodian, 17% of Hmong, and 14% of Lao communities, on par with African American and Latinx communities. Without this writing category, our communities who are most vulnerable, including Cambodian, Hmong, and Lao, will continue to be invisible. And secondly, you'll hear more from my colleagues on this point, but we highly recommend that strong guardrails be put around granting exemptions for agencies to collect this detailed data, because this would essentially render the new SPD 15 guidance obsolete, with all Asian data continuing to be lumped under one category. We want to thank OMB again for their commitment to understanding our concerns and recommendations, and we stand ready to partner with OMB and agencies, with internal champions across agencies across this country, with community leaders nationwide, to bring the potential of SPD 15 to its fullest power. Thank you, Crystal.
Thanks so much, Quinn. Next, I'm going to turn over to Sina Wipi, who is with EPIC. And again, we know this has been a big challenge also for our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, the need for greater data to be disaggregated for our communities. So Sina, I'll toss to you now.
Mahalo, Crystal, and maloelele, everyone. Many thanks to WHIAANHPI and OMB for hosting this important discussion today. EPIC is a national organization. We focus on advocacy, research, leadership development, and narrative change. Like many others have said previously, this is a win for our community and is a result of decades worth of advocacy led by many NHPI leaders in the past and continue to do so. It's the first time Fijian, Marshallese, and Tongan communities have checkboxes and are included within the NHPI categories. I do want to note that the Papua New Guinea and Chuukese communities continue to grow as well. However, they are not included in the 6 NHPI categories. Our organization was essentially found because of the need for data disaggregation. In 2014, we released a policy blueprint and 2 demographic profiles, 1 national and 1 California base, and we explicitly named in our recommendations for the implementation of the 1997 updates at the time. We're currently updating our profiles and our blueprint this year, and I'm actually on a policy tour right now, a meeting with NHPI organizations and leaders from across the country, and one of the main points of discussion is the need for data disaggregation at the federal, state, and local levels. Our communities are growing. We've met with community in California, Utah, Washington, Arkansas, and we're heading to Hawaii in a couple weeks. We've also been meeting with folks virtually. In our first policy blueprint, we met with about 20 organizations at the time. On this current tour, we've met with at least 50. It's clear to us that data disaggregation continues to be significant in our work across all issue areas, and especially in our advocacy efforts with OMB and the implementation process. The COVID-19 pandemic only exacerbated our community's health disparities and revealed that when we don't disaggregate data, it's really a matter of life and death. I just got back from Arkansas yesterday. We met with the Marshallese community there. And although Medicaid was restored to Kofu communities in 2020, the implementation of it still hasn't taken place, including places like Arkansas. Some of the community members shared that they're still having challenges accessing healthcare for their families. We also heard some of the housing issues that the Marshallese communities are facing there. And so these are just some examples that are still happening as far as the disparities that we're seeing in our communities, just from conversations we're having this year. Thank you again, WHIAANHPI, and we look forward to working with you, my partners here, and OMB to ensure a successful implementation process.
Mahalo, Sina, for your leadership and for sharing all of your mana'o with us today. Next, I'm going to toss to Terry Alminis with AAJC. So Terry, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you for having me here today. I am Terry Alminis. I'm Vice President of Sentenced Voting Programs at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. And as someone who has been working on this issue for over 2 decades, I have to start with a heartfelt thanks and congratulations to everyone who worked on this throughout this and previous administrations. It was gratifying to see the recently issued revised standards, especially after all these years of starting and stopping efforts to revise the standards. As we saw under the previous standards, very few agencies voluntarily disaggregated data, even when such activity was both allowable and encouraged. Thus, the new requirement for detailed data collection is an important step forward and a major win for the AA and NHPI communities. Disaggregated data are so critical for our communities, as you've been hearing. Our communities include many detailed subgroups that can differ dramatically across key social and economic indicators. For example, in the context of health disparities, US-born Vietnamese American women are 4 times more likely to die of breast cancer than any other Asian American group. Korean American children are 4 times more likely to have no health insurance as compared to others. Looking at disaggregated data on the prevalence of smoking in New York City showed that while the prevalence in smoking was lower overall for Asian Americans compared to whites at a rate of 14.1% compared to 18.6%, the actual prevalence of smoking was much higher for some Asian American subgroups, such as 35.5% in Korean Americans. Data disaggregation is critical because it allows us to see these differences. And when data are not disaggregated, broad trends can mask much more negative or nuanced outcomes for specific subgroups of people, as you've been hearing from my colleagues, leaving their needs and issues invisible and unmet. Now, of course, as excited as I am about the revised standard, I recognize that the issuance of the revision was merely the first step in the long-awaited modernization of our nation's race and ethnicity standards. Super excited to hear about everything that's been happening with respect to the implementation phase. And we are certainly ready to work together with OMB, other agencies, and our partners on the substantive work of implementing these revisions. It will be important for us to work with all communities of colors, some of whom have specific issues that need addressing during the implementation phase. Not only does that help to ensure we're building a fair and equitable society for all, it also represents significant portions of our own communities. The census tells us that about 1 in 5 Asian American and more than 1 in 2 NHPIs are multiracial. And between the 2010 and 2020 census, the Asian alone population grew by 35.5%, while the Asian in combination population, that is in combination with other racial groups, grew by 55.5%. Similarly, in the NHPI community, we saw the NHPI alone population growing by 27.8% and the NHPI in combination population growing by 30.8%. We also saw an increase for Asian Latinos with a 27.8% increase and 16.3% increase for NHPI Latinos. So the implementation of these standards must ensure all communities are seen and accounted for. A couple of examples of what needs, we need to see happen is seeing further research conducted to better inform the standards, including ensuring the detailed groups used will in fact elicit the best responses across all racial and ethnic groups, such as through proper signaling to the diverse set of detailed subgroups in each category, so that our multitudes of communities can see themselves in the limited real estate of a form or a survey. It will also be important for OMB to provide guidance to agencies about these new standards. Happy to hear Dr. Orvis discussing the work OMB has been doing around bridging programs. It's important to have bridging guidance outlining how one should compare data under the new standards with data collected and reported under the previous standards, which will help ensure proper usage of data over time. Additionally, guidance around coding will be important, as self-response is the preferred collection mechanism, especially for detailed data. So ensuring a consistent standard across agencies on how to code responses will help ensure comparability between data sets across agencies. And finally, OMB and other agencies must continue the meaningful engagement with community groups that they began with the whole process as they move forward into implementation, as we've been hearing today. Continue coordination with advocacy groups will help ensure that data are accessible and usable for the broader public, not just federal agencies and experts. I certainly look forward to continuing the conversation and the work together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Terry, for your, as you mentioned, decades-long advocacy on this issue and for all of that you continue to do for our communities. Next, I'm going to turn to Akhil Vora with AAPI Data, again, another longtime advocate who also worked on this issue while he was in the Obama administration as well. So Akhil, over to you.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, WHIAANHPI, White House, and OMB for organizing this critically important webinar. At AAPI Data, we produce accurate data that supports community narratives and drives actions towards enduring solutions. So what are some examples of our work? We engage in rigorous survey research with the Associated Press and NORC, and we produced a 2024 guide to AA and NHPI public opinion. So for the first time, we can answer questions that what are the policy priorities for AA and NHPI communities? What do AA and NHPI communities think about economic issues, abortion policy, the environment? We also work closely with community-based organizations to publish reports on the AA and NHPI community in partnership with many of our organizations. And lastly, we also create tools to understand federal data. So today we're actually launching a new tool, the AA and NHPI Community Data Explorer, that allows the community to look at segregated data across a range of indicators: language, income, poverty, educational attainment, and more. And users can create infographics as well as pull down data for further analysis. So at the end of the day, we want to ensure that the AA and NHPI community is recognized and prioritized, and that data disaggregation is foundational to making this a reality. So with great and deep appreciation, we want to thank the administration and all of the federal individuals who are behind making this a reality and making sure that data disaggregation is now the default. And we want to make sure that everyone understands that data disaggregation is now the default. Crystal, to answer your question, we published a recent policy report on SPD 15 that highlights some disparities that my partners and colleagues on this call were also talking about. But there's a study out of California that showed that Laotian youth were incarcerated at 9 times the rate of the state population. Bangladeshi women make 49 cents for every dollar as compared to white males. And that's why the timely and successful implementation of SPD 15 is so critical. Good data is good policy, right? But when you have no data, you have no policy. And when you have bad data, you have bad policy. And so we want to thank OMB for listening to our recommendations. That was supported by over 125 local, state, and national organizations and over 400 individuals who are closely monitoring this issue and eager to help and excited. A few things that my colleagues spoke about that I'd like to reiterate is that we're asking OMB to explore the idea of publishing an inventory of all federal data sets. We think that'd be very helpful. And we have to know where we're starting from so we know how to end. So I think that federal inventory, I think, would be a key component of us moving forward. Secondly, very excited to hear about the work that the interagency working group will be taking. Excited for them to be meeting directly with the NHPI community. And a couple of other issues that are very important to us is the idea of the federal agency exemption eager to work closely with OMB to ensure, as my colleague Quinn mentioned, that we have appropriate guardrails in place to ensure that all federal agencies understand that the baseline is disaggregation, and we don't want to create an exemption where that's not going to be moving and executed on in the near future. So thank you, Crystal. Thank you, OMB. We'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Akil. And to all of our community leaders who joined us today, you are now free to hop off of the briefing. But again, we're so grateful to you all for your, again, years, if not decades worth of advocacy and just your strong partnership working with the administration to move our communities forward. So thank you again to all of you.